I finished Fire Emblem Engage, and man, do I have a ton of stuff to talk about. Hello everyone, this will be the video where I give my complete opinions on Fire Emblem Engage. This will not count DLC, as I'll probably do a video on that later, but this will be just based on the base game. The way I will format this video is I'll break it down to the major sections of the game. The Somnule, the characters, the story, the battles, and just some extra stuff I want to mention. I will be discussing the whole story, so this is your spoiler warning if you have not finished the game yet. But before we get into it, if you are not yet, please like and subscribe to my channel to get more Fire Emblem content in the future. But with that out of the way, let's get into Fire Emblem Engage and everything I have to say about it. I'm just going to say it straight out. I think the combat in Fire Emblem Engage is better than the combat in Fire Emblem Three Houses. Not saying a lot because that is my favorite game. Let's start off talking about the main feature of Engage, the Engage. Being able to use rings with the other Fire Emblem heroes from different games as your power is really cool. The Emblem Rings can offer really cool weapons from their games, as well as new abilities, which basically takes away the necessity for battalions at all, so I'm not mad about battalions not being in Engage. A few of my favorite Emblem Rings include Byleth, whose special moves allows up to 4 people to move again after their turn, which is essentially like a super dance. And it gave a crap ton of XP too. My main character was actually one of my weakest party members until I equipped him with Byleth, and then he quickly got the first one to get level 20. And pairing that up with Sigurd would be very powerful. Sigurd's main gimmick is that he has a ton of movement, so it really helps to equip him with a person that doesn't have a lot of movement, or someone that does to give him a ton. With that extra bit of movement paired with a little bit of dancing, especially if you're a flying unit, you and Sigurd could go across the map. His special move is also very powerful. If you have a lot of enemies lined up in one place, you can use that move to charge through all of them, doing the same amount of damage. And that definitely got me out of a lot of stressful situations. Similarly, Celica is also one of my favorites. Her Warp Ragnarok can also warp you across the map, and especially if you're paired up with a very high magic user, it could get you back in the action, or it could get you an early kill on the boss, or a tough enemy, or whatever you're fighting at the time. Although, I didn't really use that strategy too much, as the two main people I equipped with it, Vale and Celine, didn't really have much defense, so I didn't want to throw them where they could easily die. The only Emblem Ring I didn't really get much use out of was Corrin's, and that's because most of her effects were just making ice on the ground, and occasionally making a dragon attack that I didn't really use too much since the guy I equipped it to was my dancer. But I'm sure if I equipped it to someone that the story did not intend me to, I'm sure I probably could have made her useful. The core combat, of course, is amazing. It's Fire Emblem, so what do you expect? There's a lot of strategic depth here, probably even more in Three Houses. It definitely has a nice rhythm to it, as the turns seem to flow really nicely. But they definitely made a lot of changes to the combat. There's no weapon durability anymore, so there's no constantly going back to the shop to buy new weapons. Except for healing and support items, which now have the durability whereas they didn't in Three Houses. Or at least they replenish after the battle. Which on the one hand that's nice, because you don't have to constantly go to Marketplace, and you can honestly go a couple chapters without going to the Marketplace at all. But, on the other hand, once you get the Brave Sword and all the Brave weapons, there's not really much necessity to go back to the shop at all, even for the legendary weapons, as the Brave weapons are just as good. They completely alter how your characters level up in this game too. Instead of leveling up, going 1 to 99 like a usual level up system would work, you go 1 to 20 for your specific class and 1 to 40 for your special class. So you can really only gain 40 levels if you want to stick to how that character is meant to grow across the game. I don't really like this new leveling up system. Although it's nice that since most Fire Emblem games are like level 40 or something, that it will end at level 40 for the characters too and max out. But again, if you level up your class too early, going back to that class to gain a few levels is tedious, whereas you could just be gaining levels continuously. It especially does not work for characters like Vander. Vander is literally the second main character you get in the game, and since he's already starting out in advanced class, he levels up so slowly that he eventually becomes useless because he can't level up as fast as he needs to. For the special classes, I don't mind as much, since there's only one class you can really go to if you want to stick with the person's intended class. So that's why I kept Yunaka on my team, because she was continuously leveling up instead of having to worry about changing her class. They also took out a lot of the customizability of the classes. I really like that you can make Dorothea, who sucks at flying in Three Houses, into a powerful mage flyer, but now you can't really do that. You're basically just stuck into whatever your character's good at, and it just isn't as fun. There's also no adjutants, so chances are the backup people will fall even further behind since they won't gain any XP, unless you constantly level them up during skirmishes, which I chose not to do. One change I do like, though, is that all the bosses have multiple health bars that once you knock it down, they'll just heal up again. I really like that since it made bosses in Three Houses like Nemesis easier than characters like Rhea, since Nemesis only had one health bar. The map design in Engage is really good, although it's often overshined by the paralog maps with the Emblem Rings, throwing back to some of the maps from their games. So funnily enough, one of my favorite maps in Engage is also one of my favorite maps in Three Houses. And that's really all I have to say in the battles. The battles were really well executed and definitely my favorite part of Engage, and that's what definitely kept me hooked throughout the entire game. And I really want to emphasize the battles kept me hooked, but I'll cover that more later. The place that serves as this game's hub world is called the Somnule. It's a place that you'll go after the end of every chapter to work on your builds and get weapons and stuff like that. It's very much like the monastery in Three Houses, but definitely altered. There's only one time you can go share a meal with your allies, so there's not going to be the 7-time meals in one day, like I would do in my New Game Plus runs of Three Houses. In reality, sharing meals with allies isn't all that necessary, since the support levels don't go up by that much when you share a meal, so it's just better to grind support levels during battle. I definitely still did the meal during each chapter, but most of my support points came from battle. In fact, the most useful thing to gain support points in wasn't even the meals or anything else themselves. It was the arena where you could choose a unit to fight one random unit that the game selects, although most of the time it will choose someone they have a support with. It helped me gain levels on units that have been falling behind in my party, so that they won't die immediately and fall even further behind. And since you can do it 3 times, you can really have any character gain at least 1 level if you do them all 3 times and they win. So you can also train them against the Emblem Rings to increase their bond level, and you can basically do that infinitely as long as you have enough spirit points. And that definitely helps for characters like Marth and Celica, who after a certain amount of time will leave your party and won't join again until like the very end of the game, to help them get to level 20 with the unit you want. And speaking of support points and bond rank, support conversations are back, and they're not as good. Even with the characters I liked more than others, their supports didn't really cover anything beyond what they're initially represented as. Even Yunaka, whose whole point is to be this mysterious character you're supposed to get to know throughout the game, you only really get to know that part of her unless you S-support her. So basically, there's not going to be a Ferdinand Dorothea support in this game. But there's a new type of support conversation called bond conversations, which outside the A lasts about 15 seconds. So that's not much better either. I think it goes without saying that the Somnule definitely looks prettier and more inviting than the monastery did in Three Houses, and I definitely think I prefer it, but outside the looks, there's definitely a lot of stuff to do here if you're interested. There are a ton of mini-games that you can do. I didn't really do many other than the strength training, because the strength was definitely helpful since my main character until much later wasn't really all that powerful, so I did that to increase his strength. There were other mini-games like the Wyvern riding minigame. I didn't do it, but I'm really happy it's there, as it definitely adds to why some people will go back to the game. They also added online functionality where you can play online, co-op, or you can build your own maps, and I definitely like that because Three Houses online was kinda weird. There's also the ring chamber where you can strengthen up your rings by giving them bond rings, which are basically like the lesser forms with other characters from the games. And there's also a feature where you can rub a ring to make it happy. Huh. Outside of that, the Somnule's laid out very nicely. All the main stuff you'll need for your adventure are laid out in one little hub, and I definitely appreciate that, as if you want to explore, you can go outside of that and just kind of walk around. The Somnule is also less big than the monastery in Three Houses, and I really appreciate that, even if the Somnule is still a tad bit too big. And overall, the Somnule is a great hub. It streamlined a lot of stuff I didn't like about the monastery in Three Houses, and pretty much made it better. I don't have too much to say with the extra stuff, but I want to bring up some points that wouldn't really fit into any of the other sections. Graphically, this game looks really nice. The environments are definitely really pretty, which is definitely a tad bit better in Three Houses, as although I didn't think the game looked ugly and the art style looked pretty cool, the environments and the backgrounds especially definitely looked a lot more pixelated than they do in Engage. It really stuck out like a sore thumb when you're talking about the story cutscenes, as the backgrounds definitely can be distracting at times. In Engage, there are definitely some examples of the background not looking great, but for the most part, they're a lot better than Three Houses. However, one thing I gotta mention that I absolutely despise is the absence of New Game Plus. Yep, you heard me right. At no point in the game after you beat it can you start a new playthrough with stuff that you gained from the previous, which really sucks, as part of the reasons I put so much hours into Three Houses was because the game was really fun to play, And I can make my units even more powerful than the previous playthrough by doing New Game Plus and equipping them with their extra weapons and their classes. That wasn't the only reason I continued to play Three Houses for obvious reasons, but that's also what made me keep playing after I finished all 4 routes. So the absence of a here in Engage takes away a ton of the replay value. Lastly, the soundtrack in Engage is unsurprisingly pretty good, although I don't think it's as memorable as other games. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know that Fire Emblem Three Houses is probably my favorite game of all time. And in the previous sections of this video, I've been saying that Engage did the combat a tad bit better, did the Somnule a tad bit better than the Monastery. So you'd expect this to be one of my favorite games, right? Right? Well, that's because I've refrained from talking about the characters or the story at all. Well, here we go. Me and my friends like to make fun of a game called Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for having some of the worst character design I've ever seen in a video game. Well, Engage definitely gets a lot closer to Xenoblade 2 than it gets to Persona 5 in terms of character design. I can't mention bad character design without mentioning the main character himself, Alear. That haircut is stupid. I don't care if it's meant to be important to the story. It looks stupid. There's a better way you could have done that with the red and blue eyes, just make them more prominent. People online are saying his hair looks like a toothpaste container, and I can't say I disagree. Yeah, his outfit doesn't look that bad, but if you showed someone a picture of Alear, what do you think they're going to gravitate towards? His clothes, or the fact that he has blue and red hair? Now, the one I used was the male design, but the glimpse I got of the female design was even stupider, as it was even longer and more prominent. Let's move on from Alear though, let's talk about one of the main villains of this game. A great villain design needs to be really intimidating, and for example, Zant from Twilight Princess does a really good job at that. His design is cold and intimidating to fit your perception of him throughout the game, but once you fight him, he takes off his helmet and he looks comical, but that's what it's supposed to, because he's really just a whining baby. Let's look at Zephyr, a character that fits the same role as Zant, being the secondary villain to the main villain, in this case, the Fell Dragon. And yeah, her design's pretty bad too. What's the point of the overly risque costume? Her character isn't really like Cornelia from Three Houses, where her character is meant to be like that. No, I guess she might want a baby, so she wants the Fell Dragon to notice her more, I guess, but even then, she wore that before, so what purpose does it serve? She's like the secondary villain in the game, and I just can't take her seriously because she looks like a stripper. Nothing would prepare me for the absolute abomination I'd see around Chapter 7 or something. This design is the stupidest I've probably ever seen in a video game up to this point. Ugh. It's a character design so bad that even if she turned out to be the best character in the game, I would never know because I immediately sent her to my bench and never interacted with her. This character is Hortensia. First off, whenever she talked or opened her mouth at all, I wanted to scream into my pillow. Because she is so annoying. Even when she's being sad or serious, I cannot take her seriously because her voice is like, have I charmed you yet? It's ridiculous. Even more ridiculous than the voice I just did. And her costume is just so weird. She looks like a pixie girl. I don't get what the purpose of that was. They could have toned it down a little. Her sister Ivy doesn't look that bad, and they're from the same kingdom, so why does she have to look like that? There's just so many contrasting colors that I just don't get how that looks appealing to people. And to top it all off, she has a weird heart tattoo on her cheek, and I also don't get the purpose of that. So if she turned out to be the best character in the game, and all my things that I said were invalid due to the fact that she was the best character, I'm sorry, but I'm prepared to take that chance that she wasn't the greatest character in the game. Oh, and her and every other female character in the game have the same face. So if you made a black and white picture and zoomed in so you couldn't see the hair or any other facial details, you would not be able to tell who it is. Luckily, it's not for the male characters too, because that would just be too much to handle. But even so, there's about 50-50 for female characters versus male characters, so it definitely is noticeable. But character design isn't everything. Maybe there's the characters that are really interesting despite their terrible designs. Guess what? If I were to count every single character I like, I would come to about 3, out of a cast of around 40. I can quickly name them if you want. Demont was pretty cool. He didn't have much personality, but I think he had a pretty cool entrance. Yunako was pretty cool. She had the most mystery out of the whole cast. But she also seemed like she had starburns, so the character design wasn't great. And lastly, Mavier acting as a villain for most of the game and joining you later was pretty cool. And that's about it. Characters for the most part were just so bland, uninteresting, one note, whatever you want to call it, that at one point during the game, I checked my party and saw a guy named Bosharon. Who was that? I'm sure I had him because I got him leveled up, but when did I get him? Who was he like? I didn't know. It turns out that Bosharon was actually one of the first party members you get, but I stopped using him after I got a new set of party members. Then a new set of 3 came along and replaced some of the guys that were underleveled, that I just didn't care about, and it kept going and going with new characters coming and going and coming and going, that I just couldn't keep track of all of them. And those new party members would replace them, so I wouldn't talk to them as much because I'd rather be working on the party members that were good enough to be in my squad, rather than ones that are underleveled just because I'm curious about them. And therein lies the issue. Engage only has 1 route and 40 characters, whereas Three Houses had 40 characters split across 4 routes. So you got time to talk to each of them in each different playthrough, so you were forced basically to get to know them. So if you played the entirety of Three Houses and you're like, why are these characters way more memorable than the other ones? Well, that's why. So I didn't like the characters. I can say that fully now. The character design was too bad, the characters in general just weren't that interesting, but there's always a story. How'd the story go? Not good, that's how. Unlike a flawed story, this story is probably not flawed, at least in its structure, but it just doesn't have anything to grasp on at all. The story is just so frustratingly bland. I can't fathom why they went from Three Houses to this. For some context, Three Houses and Engage took about the same amount of time to beat, except I'd say that Three Houses was a little bit longer. But if I were to summarize both of the game's stories, one would take me substantially longer than the other. Guess which one that is. I'm going to summarize both games' stories. I'm gonna see which one takes me longer. I didn't write this down in the script, I'm literally just going to say as it comes to my head. In fact, I'll summarize the entire story of Engage in only white clouds of Three Houses. Okay, let's start for Engage. First off, you're a dragon, slash god, slash whatever, that wakes up and his mother, that you barely knew, dies, and boom, you're on your adventure to stop the dragon because he's bad. You find some other evil people, and then you fight them, and you'll be like, ooh, maybe I was wrong after being comically evil the entire time. And then you kill the dragon. Except he wasn't also completely evil. Wow, riveting. Let's switch to Three Houses. You start the game by choosing one of the 3 main characters, in this case, the Blue Lions. You'll learn that Dimitri is actually known Edelgard, one of the other main characters, for a very long time, actually being her stepbrother. He gave her a dagger on her last day that he saw her before the academy, and the Flame Emperor has been carrying it around this entire time, so it's like, ooh, Edelgard's the Flame Emperor. And when Dimitri learns this, he goes insane. He decides to kill every last one of them, as he states himself, and vows to kill Edelgard. And that goes without even mentioning the tragedy of Dusker, or the problems that the other Blue Lions go through, or how Fargus deals with the Empire and the Alliance alone, and that's only 1 route. There is 4 routes so you get to see the perspective of all 3, and you grew to like all their students, so when you have to kill them on battle, you feel like, oh no, I killed one of my friends, one of the people I actually grew to care for across the game. Even these standard enemies, you feel like, whoa, that could be someone with a family and a backstory. In Engage, guess who you're fighting? Corrupted dead people and projections. There's a very rare chance that you'll be fighting a random enemy soldier that's human, or a boss character you actually care about, but more often than not, those boss characters end up becoming your allies, or being so one-note and bland that when you kill him, you're not like, oh, it's kinda sad he died. No. Yay, we killed the bad guy. We did it, guys. Whoopee, hooray. The closest I got to that in Fire Emblem Engage was when one girl named Ivy says, ooh, when I win, I should be feeling happy. Why do I feel rather sad? Like every other battle, because she says the exact same thing over and over again. And speaking of villains, let's talk villains, because oh my god, they suck. The villains are so comically evil, as I said. Especially Zephyr. She literally burns her own allies because they didn't do exactly what she said when they took the Emblem Rings. Yet, every single time they die, they end up being redeemed. Every single one of them. Zephyr, the one I mentioned earlier, who literally burned her own allies because they weren't doing what she exactly wanted them to. Oh yeah, she just wanted to have a kid. Briss, the guy who comically loves pain. Oh yeah, he was part of the family too. Marnie, the girl I forgot about until like 5 minutes ago. Yeah, she was actually not that happy with what Zephyr and Briss were doing, even though she literally seemed like she was. And when I say comically evil, I don't mean that I found it funny. I meant that they're so one note and so stereotypical that it's comical that they're villains at all. I'm not even gonna bother bringing up parallels to when Dimitri, Rhea, and Edelgard were villains because there really just is no comparison. They were better. They were more interesting. They were more thought-provoking. They were just better. Oh, but you might be saying, the four Hounds weren't the only villains. The Fellow Dragon exists. He's a big bad. Yeah, he was one note too, and he was also redeemed before he died because he just wanted to see his best friend, the Emblem of Beginnings, and that was good enough for him. Well, the villains aren't everything. Was the story interesting at all? No. Basically, all the moments in the story that meant to have emotional weight, or maybe they didn't, I don't know. They just didn't hit at all. I think the main part of impact was when you fought the corrupted mother. And that was only because the song that played was good. And when the only thing that occasionally makes a story halfway decent was the song choice, doesn't really make for a good story, does it? There were occasional serious story moments in quote marks, but the character design was so stupid that I just kind of felt like kind of clashed. So to bring a comparison back to Three Houses, would the Dimitri scene after Gronder Field where Byleth convinced them, instead of doing revenge for the dead, to live on for the living, would that be as good if instead of Dimitri, it was Zephyia? Or, God forbid, Hortensia? Yes, I know that story doesn't make a game, but for a game that's a 30-hour-long RPG or more, depending on how fast you want to play through it, you gotta have some reason for me to keep going. But I'm not saying that applies to all of them. I personally love Breath of the Wild, but Breath of the Wild did what I said. It didn't really have much of a story at all. It was about the world and exploring it. Whereas Engage actually tried to have a story, it was just bad. I'll say it again, story isn't always everything, but in this case, it definitely hindered my enjoyment. Once I got to like chapter 16 or something and I realized I was pretty close to the end, I just wanted to rush through and get to the end so I can play the other games I want to. It's just, I couldn't enjoy myself as much as I had with Three Houses. The story was just so basic, it was boring. So the question you've all been waiting for, did I enjoy Fire Emblem Engage? I have no idea. But I can answer if I hated it, which is no. The gameplay, it was definitely fun, even if the characters in the story were very, very disappointing. If you enjoyed the game, more power to you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to recommend this as a Fire Emblem when there's a much better Fire Emblem in my eyes on the same platform. I will say though that this Fire Emblem got me interested in Fire Emblem games I haven't beaten yet. Specifically Path of Radiance, so that's another reason I want GameCube games to be in the Switch. Path of Radiance specifically because Ike seems like a cool protagonist. But with all that said, thank you a lot for watching this video. I definitely had a lot to say about Engage, even though a lot of it wasn't positive, but I still hope you enjoyed it. Who knows, I might make a video on the DLC in the future. We'll just have to wait and see. For my next video, I'll be giving my full opinions on Persona 4 Golden, so I hope you look forward to that. But with all that said, thank you so much for watching again, and I'll see you all next time.